So I've got a short but sweet clip of Bernie Sanders explaining how after running a campaign that was revolutionary, where millions of Americans stood up to the billionaire class, we ended up electing a billionaire who is now putting more billionaires in the White House. How the hell did this happen? And his explanation is that the Democrats are out of touch and that they are partially to blame. And what he said validated everything that us progressives have been saying all along.
The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, the middle class is getting squeezed, the working class is getting left behind. And in a year where your message, that message, all of that undeniable, that really took off in the primary process for you, despite the fact, again, it seemed like you had everything stacked against you. How could it be in 2016 that year that began with your inspirational campaign ended up with the election of a billionaire whose cabinet, actually, we hear together, I don't know if the numbers are accurate or not, but I've read some stats that say his cabinet appointees alone control more income personally than 1/3 of all Americans?
Well, that's a very good question, Joe. And I think, honestly, it speaks to the failure of the Democratic Party. There was once a time in this country, FDR, Harry Truman, where working people were clear which party was on their side, which party was prepared to take on the big money interests. Remember Roosevelt talking about taking on the economic royalists. He was proud that they hated him. That's the kind of vision we need for the Democratic Party. If the billionaire class hates me or hates other progressives, we should be proud of that, because we have got to start identifying with the working people who have seen their jobs go to China and Mexico, the people who are making $10 an hour, the elderly people who can't afford prescription drugs. We have got to bring those people together to fight the big money interests who have so much power today.
So what he said there was a reality check that I don't think the Democratic Party establishment wanted to hear, because throughout the course of Hillary Clinton's campaign, you constantly heard this notion that was implied that the voters would ultimately fail Hillary Clinton, that we were the ones responsible for supporting her. We were supposed to get out and support her, even if she wasn't putting forward policies that would actually benefit us. So it's always this talk about how the voters are going to fail the party and not the other way around. So when Bernie Sanders said it speaks to the failure of the Democratic Party, you know, a bunch of heads in Washington, D.C. exploded right then and there, because that is something that they don't want to hear. The Democratic Party is way out of touch. I would have never left the Democratic Party if they hadn't betrayed me. See, I've always been the same. My policy positions have remained consistent. But the Democratic Party, they've become more and more and more out of touch with everyday voters. They were once the party of FDR. And Jimmy Carter was really the last true FDR Democrat. And after him, you had Democrats move to the right, starting with Bill Clinton. He facilitated this rightward neoliberal shift of the Democratic Party because at the time, that's what he felt would make the Democratic Party more electable, because we were just coming off of Reaganism. And people were they loved Reagan. And even though he was a terrible president, Reagan was someone who was very popular among the left and the right. So in order to be electorally viable, the Democrats saw moving to the right, or at least the center, as a strategy that would help them win. And certainly it worked at the time. But subsequently, we got more of the same. When Obama was elected, he was a centrist. If Hillary Clinton would have been elected, she would have continued with the same centrist right-wing policy. I mean, if you look at her political compass score, she is a right-wing authoritarian, whereas Bernie Sanders is simply on the left. Bernie Sanders is not an extremist. Bernie Sanders might be an independent, but he's where the heart and soul of the Democratic Party is. Hence why millions of people were inspired by his campaign. Bernie Sanders is an FDR Democrat. A social democrat is what the Democratic Party used to be. So for him to say that it speaks to the failure of the Democratic Party, I think that's a powerful, powerful message, and they needed to hear it. It is the case that the Democratic Party failed the people. It is the case that they're out of touch. The working class no longer has a viable political party. We do have the Greens, but with our biased electoral system, we live in a first-past-the-post single-member district system where it's almost impossible for them to win. They can barely win seats at the local levels. So it's almost unfeasible and unimaginable for them to win the White House unless we get electoral reform. So the Democratic Party is the one party that can effectively oppose Trump's agenda and the Republicans' harmful agenda. So if they don't wake up, we have nothing. We have Republicans' control of all three branches of government with no good checks on their power. I mean, it's scary. Another thing Bernie Sanders said, which I think is not something that you typically hear in Washington, was that if the billionaire class hates me or hates other progressives, we should be proud of that. Absolutely. And someone like FDR said the same thing decades ago. He said that if the wealthy elites hate me, I welcome their hate. And Bernie Sanders echoed this same exact thing, almost verbatim, during the primary. And it's true. There's only about 500 billionaires in the country, a little over 500, but they control almost all the policies. They bought off every single politician in the country, on the left and the right. We have no power anymore. We have no voice. Their wealth, their power drowns out our voices. So yeah, I'm tired of that. I think that they should have the same amount of power as I have. It's not fair that because they have more money, they have exponentially more power than average citizens. But many people within the Democratic Party establishment, like Hillary Clinton and Cory Booker, they embrace liberal elites and they surround themselves around liberal elites because they think that raising millions of dollars is the only way you can win and run an effective campaign. But that's not true. Bernie Sanders proved that that is false. The party's out of touch. It's rotten to the core. And if they don't wake up and listen to what Bernie Sanders is saying, it's going to be too late. Not only will the party die or become irrelevant, but Republicans are going to push through all of the most harmful things you could imagine, cutting Social Security, privatizing Medicaid, cutting Medicare. Like, it's unimaginable to me. So if they don't wake up, if they don't fight, if they don't start appealing to the American people, they're not going to be the ones that suffer. They might lose their job, but most of them are millionaires. So they've got to wake up and listen to what Bernie's saying, because it's the truth.
Support this podcast by joining the independent progressive media revolution today at humanistreport.com.